I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. Today it is Friday the 13th. Watch out. We discuss Trump's war on the election, America's hidden meth epidemic, and the fate of the Affordable Care Act. Sit back. The show starts now. The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Brigitte Santos for our top story today. After an insane election prolonged by the COVID-19 pandemic, Joe Biden is now the projected president-elect after receiving more votes than any candidate in U.S. history. Now, the results of the election will not be finalized until January, but rather than accepting defeat, President Trump is refusing to concede. He and the Republican National Committee are now waging a legal war in 5 battleground states where the race was tight over alleged election irregularities and alleged voter fraud. So far, these claims are unfounded, with judges ruling that Republicans have not provided any real evidence to back up their claims beyond hearsay and rumors. Jesse, the president and GOP have a right to sue, but it doesn't mean that they're going to win. The courts are a vital tool of democratic checks and balances, and it's better to see Trump's claims fought legally in the courts rather than illegally on the streets.
Yes and no. First of all, let's look at the situation. Right now, I looked, and in the popular vote, Joe Biden is winning by over 5 million votes. Let me repeat that, 5 million, not 1,000, million. So they really believe that 5 million votes somehow got stuffed into the ballot box in Joe Biden's favor, and no one would know at all about this, and they got to search for the proof now? It is utterly ridiculous. Yes, I suppose it's better you fight it in the courts, but the bad thing about it is it makes people doubt our elections. When Donald Trump starts fighting in court, and in most of these cases where he's fighting, he lost by more votes than he beat Hillary Clinton by last time, and she didn't do all of this. This fight in the courtroom is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Donald Trump is a little baby who ought to take the results, accept them, and move on. Donald, 5 million people voted for Joe Biden more than they did you. Can we say it any clearer than that?
All right, let's take a look at the law firms that have filed election-related lawsuits on behalf of President Trump and the Republican Party, because there is some controversy here. Now, the firms include Jones Day and Porter Wright, with Jones Day being the most prominent. Trump's former White House counsel, Don McGahn, is a partner there, and some senior lawyers at Jones Day have now told reporters they're worried the firm is advancing evidence-free arguments and helping President Trump and his allies undermine the integrity of U.S. elections. They say that's the main goal because the lawsuits are unlikely to change the outcome of the election. Lawyers at Porter Wright have reportedly also expressed similar concerns. One of that firm's lawyers has even quit in response to Porter Wright representing the president in a Pennsylvania election lawsuit. Now, even if these lawyers know they're unlikely to win, they're going to take the job. Jones Day previously represented Big Tobacco and members of bin Laden's family. So I imagine they're going to move forward with the lawsuits despite growing opposition within. FEC filings show that working with the president is lucrative. This year, Jones Day has earned $4 million in fees from the RNC, President Trump, and groups that back him, while Porter Wright has earned $700,000 for its related work this year.
Well, first, let me jump in there, Brigitte, for a moment. Brigitte. Who's paying for all this? I certainly hope it's not tax dollars, and if it's the Republican National Committee and their donors paying for this, all I can tell you, for fiscally responsible people, you sure are a bunch of dummies, because you're going into a hole you ain't gonna win. You're not gonna win. 5 million votes, I talked about it earlier. This race was not that close. It's gonna end up 309 or 306 electorals to about 200 and something. But the lawyers will do it because it's their job. They're basically required. They don't have to, but that's what lawyers do, and they'll lucratively be paid for it. I mean, they're not going to come away with this without any big money. They just want to make sure it's not our taxpayer money that's paying them. If the knuckleheads in the Republican Party want to pay for these lawyers to go against a court case that they're certainly, I hope, going to lose, if they don't, our elections truly are in big trouble.
Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton failed to concede on election night, and that trend continues with President Trump in 2020, showing that both sides have trouble taking responsibility when they lose. Now, even though Clinton conceded one day later, the Democrats have not stopped blaming foreign actors for her loss, even though no Trump associate has ever specifically been charged with criminally conspiring with Russian officials to impact the 2016 election as claimed. The Democrats were even teeing up the foreign interference narrative again prior to Joe Biden becoming the presumed president-elect. And suddenly, we're not hearing anything about that now. Instead, it's now the Republicans' turn to shift blame for losing the White House, this time pointing the finger at the domestic opposition. They also teed up their narrative about voter fraud prior to the election. Jesse, if the courts don't find direct evidence of Democrats criminally conspiring to undermine democracy, as the Republicans allege, we're still going to hear an endless barrage of baseless claims repeated ad nauseum on corporate news for the next 4 years, aren't we?
Well, we might. Again, that will depend, I think, a great deal on how the Republicans respond to Donald Trump once he is out of office. Now, there's a lot of rumor that Trump's going to seek office 4 years from now, and that this has helped to build his case, to keep his base intact, to know he never quit. I got news for you, Donnie boy. You're going to be 4 years older now. You're going to be 78 years old. You're going to be Joe Biden's age when that next election takes place. How do you know you're even going to be physically capable of participating, or even that you'll be alive? So why don't, for the good of the country, do something patriotic in your lifetime, which you've never done before? Do something patriotic, President Trump. Follow the rules and move on with a little bit of class. If you want to run 4 years from now, great. But don't tear everything up now because you're having a little bit of a tantrum because you lost.
We now shift to health care. Arguments in another challenge to the Affordable Care Act have begun at the U.S. Supreme Court. The Trump administration and a group of Republican states argue that the entire Affordable Care Act should be struck down since the individual mandate is still included in the law. The penalty for not having health insurance was lowered to $0 in 2017 by a Republican-controlled Congress. Still, red states are arguing that the mandate is so intertwined with other provisions that the entire bill should be scrapped. But so far, 5 justices have indicated that they're going to reject the latest challenge, including conservative justices Chief John G. Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh, who say Congress's decision in 2017 to zero out that penalty did not indicate a desire to kill the entire law. Kavanaugh stated, quote, "It does seem fairly clear that the proper remedy would be to sever the mandate provision and leave the rest of the act in place, like the provisions regarding pre-existing conditions and the rest." The High Court has already upheld the Affordable Care Act in 2 previous challenges, ruling that the individual mandate is constitutional because it amounts to a tax which Congress has a right to assess. The Affordable Care Act will likely be upheld again, and killing the ACA right now would have increased the number of uninsured people in America by 70%, according to new estimates. That would be catastrophic in the middle of a global pandemic. Also, Jesse, the Republicans had 4 years to come up with an alternative health care plan, but they didn't, so this is what we've got.
Exactly. I mean, if the Republicans wanted to get rid of Obamacare, they should have been working hard to come up with an alternative so that they can then present that to the American people, and the American people can look and they can say, see, ours is better. And if indeed theirs is better, then go ahead. But the problem is they haven't come up with nothing. And if they overrule the Affordable Care Act, as you said, there's going to be a lot of hurting people like there's not a lot of hurting people right now. Get ready for how these people are going to be hurting. But you know, It looks like they're going to hold it up, but don't ever hold your breath. Just because people say a few things during the argumentative part of the case does not mean necessarily they're going to vote that way. You got to wait till those votes are in and actually see what happens from the Supreme Court. I don't think the ACA is out of the woods yet of not being killed completely. I'm holding my breath on it that don't happen, and it looks like it might not, but I ain't gonna exhale until I hear them actually vote.
All right, for our final story, we turn to America's hidden meth epidemic. While the media and politicians mainly focus on the opioid crisis, meth use and addiction is rising across the country. Between 2011 and 2017, meth overdoses more than quadrupled. And last year alone, meth overdoses spiked 25%. 70% of local law enforcement agencies across the West and Midwest now say that meth is their biggest drug threat. Sadly, demand for meth in the United States is high. This October, the DEA recovered a record 2,200 pounds of methamphetamine just 60 miles south of Los Angeles. It was the largest domestic meth seizure in history. And 1 week later, U.S. Customs and Border Protection recovered over 3,000 pounds of methamphetamine at San Diego's Otay Mesa port of entry. That's the second largest meth bust in CBP's history. Now, according to the DEA, these two seizures are more than enough to provide a dose of meth for every man, woman, and child in the United States and Mexico. Jesse, why do you think so many people in the U.S. are turning to illegal drugs these days?
You know, probably they're depressed. I don't know. I've never used meth. I don't know much about it personally, and but rest assured, all this stuff wouldn't be coming into our country if there wasn't a demand. Because they only move illegal substances like that if there's a demand for it and if there's big money to be made. So the United States people have to start looking in the mirror a little bit and understanding that being addicted to meth is not probably that good a thing. But then again, my next guest is going to clear us up a lot on that, because meth is something that's just the illegal brand for other things people can get. And it'll be interesting to hear that coming up shortly. But for right now, what you have to do is stop the United States demand for drugs. As long as there is a demand in this country, the demand will be met, whether legally or illegally, whichever way. Notice in the cannabis industry, there's a huge demand for it. They've now legalized it, and I believe Illinois made $71 million in the month of July, if I recall right. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily you allow people to free rein on meth, but it's still a drug and it should be treated medically. Let me say that again. Addiction should be treated medically, not criminally.
It's time for a quick break. When we return, Jesse's going to sit down with author Jason Pine to talk more about America's meth crisis. We'll be right back.
The world according to Jesse. Jason Pine is a professor of anthropology and media studies at Purchase College, a state university in New York. He joins me now to discuss his latest book, The Alchemy of Meth and America's Drug Epidemic. Jason, America's opiate epidemic is well publicized, but the U.S. has another epidemic that the media and politicians typically ignore. Why is meth addiction in the U.S. an underreported issue?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I don't have precise answers, but I do have some speculative answers. I think, for one, opioids likely have a wider range of users than does meth. That span across race, class, ethnicity, and region. And so this makes the drug a concern for many kinds of people, consumers of the media. While meth, on the other hand, is often associated with poor, white, rural people, despite the fact that there are many different kinds of users, not only those types. And so possibly the rural US and white poor are simply not sexy enough topics for the media. One other possibility that I think might be in play is that opioid overdose and death is associated with at least one clearly identifiable culprit, Purdue Pharma, whereas meth comes from a whole range of culprits, a whole range of enablers, let's say.
Now, what does meth addiction look like, and how is it ravaging communities?
Well, meth is a very seductive drug and in a very particular way. Unlike opioids, which give you the feeling of satiation and a desire to cocoon and slip out of life, meth gives you what's called anticipatory pleasure or excitement about rewards that are to come. And it activates what neuroscientists call the seeking system. So that incites curiosity, charges you with energy, confidence, some risk aversion. And so this feeling, this excitement about the future is a lot like hope. So if you think about that, many of the people that I spent time with during my research in Missouri and also Arkansas, they first took meth while they were on the job. It was passed to them by colleagues who were doing roofing, cement work, truck driving, factory work, said that they could work longer hours and they could actually enjoy the work, however mind numbing or backbreaking it was, and feel productive, have more income, make ends meet better because the work they were doing was not sufficient as a living wage, and transform oneself into a person that feels relevant and productive and has self-worth and a sense of accomplishment. So eventually this spirals out of control. The tolerance for the drug rises, and so people begin producing it, they begin losing their jobs, meth making becomes their jobs, and then a whole assortment of problems come with producing meth in your own home. There are violent explosions, there's environmental damage, child abuse, all sorts of property crimes, including theft, identity theft, in order to obtain the materials to produce the meth, and hospitals inundated with horrible burn victims and, uh, and victims of abuse as well. But this situation has changed.
Now, is there a link between meth alchemy in the US and big pharma or the industrial chemical industry?
Absolutely. The key ingredient for producing meth is pseudoephedrine-based cold medicine, and the pharmaceutical industry has a team of lobbyists, an army of lobbyists that have regularly blocked any sort of regulation of the sale and distribution of pseudoephedrine-based cold medicine. Uh, Eventually, they could not hold back the pressure. But narcotics agents that I've spoken to over the years have told me repeatedly that the meth production problem in the US would be seriously mitigated if the pharmaceutical lobbyists did not have so much power in blocking legislation. And meth alchemy is a parallel to pharmaceutical alchemy. It's sort of the rogue laboratory to produce the same drug that is already widely distributed, over distributed in the United States and well beyond, which is a whole class of drugs called amphetamines, ADHD medications that have the same effects.
Now, Oregon just voted to decriminalize the possession and use of small amounts of drugs, including meth. The state also plans to set up free addiction recovery centers. What are your thoughts on this approach versus jail time?
I fully support treatment over incarceration. I think that accessible, affordable, and adequately funded treatment is sorely lacking throughout the United States. And meth addiction has an incredibly high relapse rate. And more than a few treatment professionals that I've spoken to over the years have told me that there's up to a 2-year mark where a person who is trying to recover is out in the clear and can stay clean, has a chance of not relapsing. So imagine 2 years. And there are few, if any, I can't imagine any treatment centers that will provide treatment for that long. Treatment programs and the resources needed to reintegrate people into lives that are meth-free are sorely needed. Meth addiction is extremely intense and it overwhelms the user and really quickly. And it's a seductive high because it convinces you that you are in fact more sober, more alive, alert, all of the things I said earlier, energetic, courageous, ready for action. So in a sense, this is an insidious drug that convinces you that you are becoming the person that you're meant to be, the individual that you or I would even want to be, which is someone who is on top of things, is productive, accomplished, and feels self-confident. And this syncs up with a general sensibility that comes from American-style capitalism, where you're never doing enough and you're never extracting enough from yourself to be the person, the ideal person that lives in the United States and is called productive and successful.
Jason, I want to thank you for shining the light on meth. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for joining me today. Been very valuable information. Good luck.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
The world according to Jesse.
Let's turn to the viewers. We asked people on social media what they think of Trump's election lawsuits. Angel Rivera says the Trump campaign makes an interesting case to invalidate the results in Pennsylvania. Now, even if Biden takes office as the 46th president of the United States, it won't matter because Biden is a lame duck president on day one, and Trump will probably run again in 4 years.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with Angel on that one. First of all, I don't think it's a given Trump is going to run again. I don't think that necessarily he will remain the power structure of the Republican Party. We're going to have to wait and see when all the water comes through past the dam on that. So I'm not necessarily in agreement with that, and I certainly don't think that he has a clear path to win in 4 years. Donald Trump has got a lot to answer for, and in 4 years the answering will take place.
Yeah, and the Senate is still up for grabs in Georgia in the runoff in January, so it's not necessarily the case that Biden will be a lame duck. We'll have to wait and see.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, there's no age limit. It doesn't say that President-elect Biden's only going to do 1 term. He's eligible to do 2 if he's still physically up for it.
Another user says Trump's building a foundation for a 2024 run. They have no chance of success with these lawsuits, but it stokes his base and creates a narrative of the election being stolen, which will just be used to gain support for a second Trump run.
Well, again, I talked about it. How can they keep a basis that the election was stolen from them when it was over 5 million votes? How many votes, how many semi-trucks would you fill up with 5 million votes? Quite a few. And they're sneaking around like nobody saw any of this and it was all induced into our electoral system. Come on. He lost bigger than what he lets on. He lost worse than Hillary lost to him. And you didn't see Hillary whining and crying. Donald Trump, how does that feel that a woman can stand up better than you to a loss?
Thank you for watching. Send us your comments on Facebook and Twitter for a chance to be featured next week. As always, we'll be back covering more stories ignored by the corporate media.
And remember, when the government lies, of course the truth becomes a traitor. Wear your mask and stay vigilant.
The world according to Jesse.